All right, and moving ahead, after the Genesis, you actually had several add-ons before the Saturn. You had the Sega CD, you had the Sega 32X, and I guess nowadays the reputation is they were pretty much bad ideas from the get-go. But do they have any saving graces in your opinion?
Well, I think they're I think they're concepts that would have worked well in theory had Sega not just pushed them for people to buy. Like I think Sega should have fine-tuned them a bit more. Like had the Sega CD been their CD system and they would have made it as powerful as the PlayStation. So if they would have let it sit in the cooker for a few years instead of just being an add-on that only sold, a couple million at most. I don't even know if it sold that much, but I think it would have been great. Great for them. But I think, yeah, there's some great games on the Sega CD. Snatcher, the Lunar games. There's some great kind of enhanced ports, I guess. Earthworm Jim, I think, supposedly is a really good port. Again, I have not played a good number of these games, but I've heard good things about some of the stuff on the Sega CD. 32X, less quality there, but I also think that suffers from just the fact that the 32X was hardly around for more than a year and a half or so, and that's your problem right there. Developers didn't know what to do with it because they knew the Saturn was coming, and I'm sure Sega had approached them about developing for that as well. Sega stretched themselves way too thin, and it never fails to like amaze me that at one point they had five or six systems going at once. The Genesis, the Master System, the Game Gear, the Sega CD, the 32X, Saturn. That's just all within a couple years. That's unreal. There's no way, it's like no wonder they went out of the hardware business. The Dreamcast was their last hurrah, and even if it wouldn't have, I don't know. I almost think the writing was on the wall. Even if the Dreamcast had been this resounding success, I just don't know that it would have carried them through. And they, even if the PlayStation 2 hadn't been as big of a threat, it just seemed like they had kind of exhausted their resources. And yeah, the 32X and Sega CD have some good stuff, but it's not it's not like the Genesis. The Genesis is well remembered for a reason, and the Sega CD and 32X have their fans, but it's just not quite as good.
And it's fairly easy to emulate old Sega Master System and Genesis games, but what are your plans moving forward to work on the Saturn and Dreamcast, which have notoriously obscure games, hard to find games, and are really difficult to emulate on a computer? So what's your strategy there?
Yeah, so for the Saturn, probably going to have to mod my console. Realistically soft mod it so that I can just burn ROMs to disks, and I'm like, this is so illegal. Well, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but yeah, this is just what I'm going to have to do if I'm going to continue to do this into the future. It's just the way it's going to have to be, unless somebody comes out with a fantastic Saturn emulator, which you would expect in 2017, but it's just not there still. So yeah, that's probably what I'm going to have to do is mod the thing to play games and just download ISOs. For the Dreamcast is different. I would be more than happy to play the games naturally, so to say, with the discs, but Dreamcast discs, some of them are already kind of deteriorating, and in some cases, I have a friend who used to collect Dreamcast games, and he said he bought one that was still sealed, and he opened it, and this is not long ago, a couple years ago maybe, and it wouldn't play. The disc had just deteriorated, and nobody had used it, just sat in the wrapper for 15 years, and maybe that was the problem. But it's just weird. I've heard that happening a lot, and so with the Dreamcast, again, by necessity, more than the Saturn, I'll probably have to download ROMs and use it that way. Not the classiest approach, admittedly, but I'm not doing this from a collector standpoint. I'm doing this more as it's an exploration. That's what this is. It's to explore these games, and especially Sega stuff is just not as well documented on online as Nintendo stuff. So I really want I really want to keep going. Oh, and for the Saturn as well, I will have to learn Japanese, basic, hopefully basic Japanese. But yeah, there's a ton of visual novels, which the U.S. has just been starting to get in the last few years. But in the 90s was unthinkable that they would come here, except maybe on PC. But yeah, tons of visual novels only in Japan, and I'm gonna have to learn Japanese for that. There's just no other way. So I have a long, arduous road ahead, but I'm looking forward to it.
And although both systems were commercial failures, the Sega Saturn and the Sega Dreamcast have both gone on to have huge cult followings. So what is it about these two systems you think make them such popular consoles for dedicated hardcore gamers?
Yeah, so the Saturn was Sega kind of not, I don't know. Again, this is speculation on just my opinion and from what I remember being alive at the time and kind of my thoughts now in the present. But with the Saturn, I feel like Sega wasn't sure what they were going for. They wanted it to be, from what I understand, they wanted it to be a great 2D system. But when they saw that the PlayStation could do amazing 3D, they're like, "Ah, crap, we gotta scramble and make this puppy, put out some decent 3D at least." And so, but the 2D games on there are fantastic. I mean, Capcom's fighting games are way better than they are in the PlayStation. The PlayStation almost had the opposite problem where it couldn't handle 2D very well, but it could handle 3D. Also, I think, it's kind of like the Wii U, right now, where the people that have it really love it. There's about 20 to 30 really great games on the Wii U. And it's kind of like the Saturn and the Dreamcast, except the Dreamcast, more than the Saturn, I felt like it was just hit after hit after hit, and then finally it was done. Like, there were so many great games on the Dreamcast at the time. Again, I don't know how well they've aged, but at the time, most Dreamcast games were just getting high marks across the board. It was like Soul Calibur's fantastic, Sonic Adventure is great, Crazy Taxi, Jet Grind Radio, Skies of Arcadia, hit after hit after hit, and all the Capcom adaptations, good shmups on there. It was Sega's last hurrah. I mean, they really pulled out all the stops. So I think that's why the Dreamcast is so appreciated. And the Saturn, I think, is just this weird beast. Like you mentioned, it's notoriously difficult to emulate, and so not a lot of people have played it. So it's also this kind of mysterious, like, ooh, what games are on here that I've never tried? And the people that grew up with it, or that had it, are like, oh, there's a lot of great stuff. And so I think the Saturn has a bit of a mystery to it, whereas the Dreamcast just had rock solid great games for the 3 years it was around. You really couldn't beat that library. And the PS2 couldn't catch it until like into 2001, early 2002 even. So, yeah, I think that's why those games or those consoles are remembered fondly.
And it may be a little bit too early to tell, but just looking at what Sega did over its 20 years as a hardware manufacturer, how did they change the video game industry? What did they do that changed video gaming forever that perhaps Nintendo never would have done?
I think they were riskier. They like to take risks. Sometimes, and Nintendo does too, but they do it in a very conservative way. It's very strange. But Sega was just like, oh, we have this new idea for hardware. Hey, let's put it out tomorrow. It's like almost felt like there was no, like, holding back there. And I think their riskiness, their kind of aggressiveness, I think Sony would take a more nuanced approach to some of that. I mean, if we remember the Crash Bandicoot commercials from the mid to late 90s where, I mean, they were throwing shade hard at Nintendo and Sega. And, that's right from Sega's marketing playbook, at least Sega of America. So, I think they kind of changed the landscape of gaming into something a bit more aggressive. And, risks, again, for companies to take the kind of risks that Sega took, that they often go out of business. And so we should be thankful that Sega still exists as just a publisher and developer, because if they wouldn't have caught themselves, they might have gone under, and we wouldn't want that. But yeah, I think Sega games as a whole, and today they're a shell of their former self. It's very sad, outside of like Yakuza and Sonic stuff. But I think that's, you know, whether they had the lasting influence that I would like them to have is hard to say. I don't know that you can really look at games today, at least AAA titles, and go, oh yeah, Sega influenced that. I don't think so, which is unfortunate. But then again, I don't think you can really say that too much with Nintendo either, in the sense that Nintendo games just have this certain feel, and even when companies try to replicate that, they can't very well. So, yeah, I think Sega's influence is a little hard to see today, but, you know, maybe the bombastic arcade experience at home, you know, maybe just this idea that you could play Soul Calibur at home, or you could play Mortal Kombat and have the blood, and, you know, maybe that idea is something that very flashy, very like get your attention, whereas Nintendo did that, but again, more conservative way of doing things. And yeah, it's hard to say. That's a good question. I'll have to ponder that a bit more. I'm sorry I don't have a more fully realized answer for you.
And when you look at everything Sega did as a console manufacturer and a software developer, they had so many ideas that were just so ahead of their time. They had the Sega Channel, where doing downloaded games in the mid-1990s. You had open world games like Shenmue before Grand Theft Auto 3. You just had all this experimental hardware with, you know, CD technology and, you know, internet integration. So what have video game developers since picked up from Sega and used as part of their game design?
Well, you listed some of the biggies right there. The idea of the Sega Channel, I mean, that thing is just amazing. Like, even as a kid, I'm like, no way, is that even possible? Shenmue, you know, an open world game before GTA. You know, kind of, again, Sega is an arcade game developer, first and foremost. Even though they really wanted that console money, you know, they can't not create arcade stuff, and they got better at creating console stuff. But maybe, you know, maybe what they did as far as design goes is just that, you know, they brought the arcade home. They did things that, and to maybe put it on a more larger level, I think they did things that maybe at the time weren't considered possible. So, like, you look at NES ports, right, of arcade games, Double Dragon, Ninja Gaiden. They basically had to make new games because they couldn't, you know, they couldn't shrink those down properly. Strider's another one. And so, you know, maybe Sega was like, oh, you didn't think that was possible? Well, guess what, it is. And I think that's what Sega, maybe that's their design, is that, oh, you didn't think this was possible? Well, we've just done it. Now, sometimes that didn't work out for them very well, and sometimes it did. But ultimately, they were always ahead of their time, always, with the exception of the SG-1000, which was actually inferior hardware to the Famicom. But after that, they never let Nintendo kind of strong-arm them again as far as that goes. And I think the Sega CD, you look at the Sega CD, that's definitely a response to the Super Nintendo. I mean, no question. The fact that, and the idea that CD technology was becoming a thing for sure, but the Genesis just didn't look as good as the Super Nintendo, so what were they going to do? Well, throw an add-on on there, you know? So just, if a developer is bold in their ideas and willing to experiment without caring about the consequences, I feel like that's a Sega trademark, and that's what they brought to the industry.
And what are some of the short-term and long-term plans for Sega does? I mean, obviously when you have a decade-long project like this, there's a lot of planning that goes into it. So just how are you going about developing this website and keeping it online?
Yeah, so, well, short-term plans, I would love to get some books out there, you know, kind of just going with the reviews, like a complete guide to the SG-1000, whatever that would look like. That would be great, but I would need to raise capital for that, and I am not very good at doing that. So if anybody knows how to do that is listening, please give me a shout out via email, because I would love to do that, but I just don't have the personal finances to invest in that sort of thing right now. Love to do that. Yeah, as far as just keeping it online, I mean, thankfully I get enough Patreon, support from Patreon to keep the website going, hosting fees, and keep the podcast hosting fees going, and so that's kind of what that pays for. I do have a Patreon, patreon.com/Dylan Cornelius. It's for Sega Does, and if you're interested in supporting the site, I also have a donate button on the site. It looks pretty trashy, I'll admit that. I'm going to fix it pretty soon, but there is a donate button via PayPal if you would like to do that, just a one-time thing as opposed to like a monthly Patreon thing. But the idea is just that to keep the lights on. I would love to do this as a full-time gig. Of course, I can't. It's very hard to do that. But I hope to do that in the future. I hope gaming history becomes more of a thing. I feel like it is. I feel like for the people that care about it, it's catching on. More people are starting to do their own type of chrono-gaming projects, or just history of gaming, that sort of thing. I mean, it makes sense. Atari's been around, been a thing for the last 40, 45 years, and so console gaming has been around for a while now, and I hope this picks up. I hope long term, like you mentioned at the very beginning, this is a decade-long thing at least, maybe even longer than that. And I'm committed at this point. Life circumstances may arise, but I'd like to think that even if I had to step away for a bit, I could come back, because it's a void. I see the void, and I would like to fill it. That's the whole goal, is just to make this a place where anybody who wants to learn about Sega games could come and do that.
And if the Sega Omnibus Online wasn't ambitious enough, you already have plans for your next major chrono-gaming project. So would you like to tell us details about that?
Yeah, well, so another gap in my gaming history is Sony stuff. Again, kind of like Sega, it's not that I didn't have a PS2, but I got it really late, kind of played the main, only games I was interested in, and there's just so much on the PS1 and PS2. I would love to explore those. But gosh, that's that's at least as long as, maybe not as long as Sega does, but boy, it's an undertaking as well, because both of those libraries are just massive. So whether that'll happen, we'll see. But I would love to do that in the future, Lord willing.
All right, and we'll start to deaccelerate here and conclude the interview. Yeah, are there any URLs, social media sites, crowd-raising sites you asked to direct our readers and viewers to?
Sure. So, again, I guess the main one that we're talking about, SegaDoes.com. Pretty simple. I'm on Twitter. You can find me at Dylan, DYLAN, so the Dylan D. I'm on Facebook. If you look up Sega Does, you'll find the site, or you'll find the Facebook page. I guess I kind of jumped the gun with this, but Patreon, patreon.com/Dylan Cornelius. That is for the Sega Does, and then you can donate as well on the site. There's a big, ugly PayPal donate button on the site, but hopefully that will be fixed soon. It looks a bit classier. But yeah, one-time donations through that, whatever you would like to do. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much, James, for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And, just to conclude, I have to ask you about probably the most iconic Sega game of them all, the game that came out for the Genesis in the early 1990s and really just put the company on the map. It's a game considered by many to be among the greatest ever in the history of gaming. So just to you, what do you think of that all-time classic Slaughter Sport.
It's an abomination. You hear of. Okay, so this is going to sound weird. Hang with me for a second. You hear of gods having several names, Zeus was Zeus in Greece, but it was called, I forget what his name was in Rome. In Rome, they changed it. Different gods, the Judeo-Christian God has many names. I like to think of Slaughter Sport as a evil god that has many names because it does. So it has like 4 different names depending on the console you're playing on. It's Fat Man, Tongue of the Fat Man, Mondo's something or other, I can't remember. And then Slaughter Sport. It is an abomination. It is the worst fighting game I've ever played. I've played Shaq Fu. I've played Rise of the Robots. This is worse than those. It does not get any attention because it is horrible. Because people don't know that it exists. But it is far and away just awful. I appreciate you calling attention to it because more people need to know that it exists and that they should stay away from it. Mondo's Bloodsport, I think, is what the other name was. It is an evil, evil game.